The air inside the auditorium felt different that evening, thick with anticipation, as if every breath the audience took carried the weight of 1,000 hopes. The lights hung above the stage like glowing halos, casting soft shadows over the murmuring crowd. People whispered excitedly, some clutching tickets, others brushing lint off their shirts, all of them waiting for the next performer. It was one of those nights when the world seemed ready to witness something extraordinary without knowing exactly what was coming. Backstage, away from the noise and the lights, a young Filipino violinist named Angelo stood quietly in the corner, holding his old wooden violin as though it were a fragile piece of his soul. He was only 17, but his eyes carried the kind of depth that usually belonged to someone who had lived through far more years. His fingers trembled, not from fear of the stage, but from the memory of everything he had gone through to reach that moment. Under the harsh backstage lights, the violin he held didn't look impressive. It wasn't polished, nor did it shine the way expensive instruments do. The wood was scratched, the edges worn down, and the chin rest had a small crack. But to Angelo, it was priceless. It was the last thing his father had touched before he was taken away by the flood that swallowed their village 2 years earlier. The loss had come suddenly. One moment they were laughing in their small living room in Cebu, the next moment rain was pounding against the roof like fists demanding to be let in. The river behind their house had swelled and burst, sweeping away homes, memories, and lives. Angelo remembered clinging to the floating debris, tightly holding his violin case because his father had told him earlier that day that no matter what happened, he must never let go of the music inside him. When Angelo survived but his father didn't, the violin became more than an instrument. It became a promise he was determined to keep. That promise had carried him all the way from a makeshift evacuation camp to the dimly lit corners of a street market where he played for passing strangers. Sometimes people dropped coins into his open violin case, sometimes they didn't, but he always kept playing. It was the only way he knew how to keep his father close. Each note felt like a conversation they never finished. Eventually, a tourist recorded him playing, posted the video online, and it spread quietly but steadily until a talent scout contacted him. That message changed everything. Now he was standing backstage at one of the biggest stages in the world, moments away from performing in front of Simon Cowell. A backstage coordinator signaled him that it was time. Angelo took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and whispered something only he could hear. Then he stepped toward the stage. The bright lights washed over him instantly, making the room disappear. The judges looked up. The audience turned silent. His heart pounded, but he kept walking until he reached the center where dreams were either born or shattered. Simon Cowell looked at him with curiosity, noticing the boy's gentle presence and the old violin tucked under his arm. He leaned forward slightly, sensing something fragile about this young musician. When the judge asked his name, Angelo's voice came out soft but steady. He said he came from Cebu in the Philippines and that he would be playing the violin. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. There was something about his tone, not just his speaking voice but the way he held himself, that made the audience lean in. Angelo didn't say much else. He wasn't there for long introductions or dramatic explanations. He simply nodded, lifted his violin, and placed the bow lightly against the strings. The hall fell utterly silent. Then he played the first note of Nearer My God to Thee. It was a single, trembling note, pure, haunting, and impossibly soft. Yet it cut through the air more powerfully than any scream could. A collective breath was drawn from the audience as that sound lingered, shaping itself into something that felt like prayer in musical form. People recognized the melody immediately. But it wasn't just the choice of song that made the moment heavy, it was the way Angelo carried it. There was love in his sound, but also sorrow, faith, longing, memory, and something deep, almost sacred. As he continued, the notes flowed like water slipping between fingers. Every stroke of the bow felt like a whispered goodbye, every vibrato a plea for healing. His left hand moved quickly, gracefully, dancing across the fingerboard with a precision that wasn't learned, it was lived. It came from years of playing barefoot on dusty streets, from using music as shelter. His expression softened, his eyes fixed on the strings as though the world no longer existed around him. He played not to impress, but to speak. And suddenly, the audience understood. The melody soared higher, fuller. The sound expanded, filling every corner of the auditorium, touching people who didn't even believe music could move them anymore. A woman in the front row pressed her hands against her mouth. A man a few rows behind lowered his gaze to hide the tears welling up. Up on the judges' panel, Simon Cowell seemed frozen. From the very first note, his expression had changed, not dramatically, but in small ways. His eyes softened. He blinked twice. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he sat back as though the weight of the music pushed against him. Simon had heard countless performances, from extraordinary to painfully forgettable, but something about Angelo was different. The boy wasn't just playing a hymn, he was carrying an entire life inside it. As Angelo reached the middle portion of the song, the tempo shifted. His bow trembled with emotion, the notes quivering as though echoing the storms he had survived. The audience could feel the grief pouring out, but there was resilience woven into every phrase. His performance felt like reliving loss and hope at the same time, like walking towards something painful yet beautiful. Then came the moment that would never be forgotten. Angelo lifted the bow for the next high note, a note so delicate it felt like it might shatter. He closed his eyes just before the sound escaped the strings, and when it did, the entire room held its breath. The note rose, trembling softly, glowing with sorrow and reverence. It lingered in the air for what felt like an eternity. And that was the moment Simon Cowell broke. His eyes suddenly glistened, reflecting stage lights he usually faced with unshakable composure. His lips pressed tightly together, his jaw clenched, his expression cracked. He looked away for a second, blinking hard, trying to hide the terror that escaped despite him. His chest moved slowly as he inhaled. He wiped his cheek discreetly, but the camera caught it anyway. The audience gasped, not because he cried, but because it was Simon. The man known for his sharp critiques, his brutal honesty, his emotional walls. Yet here he was, undone by a young Filipino violinist with an old instrument and a story he hadn't even shared. The music swelled again, softening into a tender diminuendo. Angelo poured everything he had left into the final notes, his father's memory, his mother's struggles, the nights he played under flickering streetlights to earn coins for food, the fear of failing, the hope of being seen, the ache of missing someone who taught him the meaning of music. He lowered his bow slowly. The final note hovered in the air, then dissolved. Silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty but overwhelmingly full. No one moved. Then the audience rose to their feet with such force that the floor shook. Applause erupted, crashing through the hall like thunder. People clapped until their palms burned. Some cried openly. Others covered their faces, unable to handle the emotion that had swept over them. Angelo stood there, not sure what to do. He had never experienced applause like this. He clutched his violin close to his chest, blinking repeatedly as tears formed in his eyes. But when he saw Simon standing before anyone else, his breath caught. Simon Cowell was on his feet. His eyes were red, glistening. He wasn't smiling, he was feeling. Deeply, honestly. He exhaled, placed his hands on the desk, and looked directly at Angelo. When the applause softened, Simon leaned into his microphone. What he said would be remembered long after the show ended. He told Angelo that some performances are technically excellent, some are entertaining, and some are unforgettable. But what Angelo had just delivered was something beyond any of that. It was the kind of performance that reminded people why music exists. It was pure, raw, spiritual. It was healing disguised as melody. Simon admitted that he hadn't expected to be emotionally shaken, but Angelo had reached places inside him that music rarely touched anymore. With his voice breaking slightly, Simon whispered that Angelo had not played a song. He had played a prayer. The audience erupted again. Each judge spoke after that. One praised him for the soul in his playing. Another said she felt like she had just witnessed something sacred. Another admitted she cried halfway through because the music felt alive. But Angelo listened to their words with humility, nodding, holding the violin as gently as if it were a small child. Then Simon pressed the golden buzzer. Time stopped. The golden confetti burst from above, falling in slow motion over the stage. The lights glowed brighter, the audience roared, and Angelo's eyes widened in pure disbelief. He covered his mouth with his hand, shaking as the reality washed over him. The moment felt like a dream he wasn't ready for. He looked up, watching the golden pieces drift around him like blessings from somewhere beyond. He remembered his father's voice. Never let go of the music inside you. He didn't. As confetti rained down, Angelo slowly lifted his violin once more. He hugged it, not for the cameras, not for the audience, but for a man who wasn't there to see the promise fulfilled. A man who had told him to keep playing no matter what storms came. The stage filled with staff and hosts congratulating him, but he barely heard them. His tears streamed freely, his shoulders shook. Yet through the sobs, a soft smile formed on his lips. For the first time, he felt seen. For the first time, his pain had turned into something beautiful. Backstage, after the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Angelo sat alone on a small stool, confetti still tangled in his hair. He ran his fingers across the body of his violin, tracing the cracks like they were part of a story written into the wood. One of the crew members walked by and stopped when she saw him. She didn't speak. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder, acknowledging the weight of what he had just shared with the world. He whispered faintly, as though speaking to the air, telling his father he hoped he played well enough. Later that night, clips of his performance spread across social media. People from different countries shared the video, adding comments about how deeply it touched them. Some said they cried, others said they felt peace. Some said they hadn't been moved by music in years until that moment, but the truth was simpler. Angelo didn't change the world with fame or theatrics. He changed it with honesty. Music born from grief. Music shaped by love. Music that carried someone's memory, someone's last touch, someone's whispered promise. When he walked out of the studio, stepping into the cold night air, everything felt different. The world looked the same, the streetlights, the parked cars, the taxis driving by, but something inside him had shifted. He lifted his violin case, taking one more deep breath. His journey wasn't over, it was just beginning, but for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't walking alone. He walked with golden confetti still stuck to his clothes, with thousands of hearts newly connected to his, with the sound of applause echoing like blessings in the distance, and with the invisible hand of his father guiding him forward. And somewhere deep within him, the final note of "Nearer My God to Thee" still glowed.